Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay out there in the world? Excellent. Thanks, Amy. I'm just going to call the meeting to order at 1 o'clock. And as you know, we're going to start with electing a chair. So
Sorry, we're still missing a director. We need to wait for Director Popoff.
Oh, my bad. Sorry, I didn't see he isn't there. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll go back on mute for a few minutes.
Okay, I'll send him an email just to prompt him in case he missed something. Thanks. Maybe I'll just check in. Shelley, did you receive any response from Walter when you sent the meeting invite?
I did. He said he would attend.
Okay, great. I'll just send him a reminder.
Thank you.
Did we also draft him to be chair? I can't remember.
I don't think we did, but I see where you're going.
Well, Gary and you have been there the longest, so Chair Watson. So maybe the seniority rule? I can't remember.
You calling somebody old?
I think he is, Gary. I will just send an email to Walter to send him a quick reminder. If he doesn't show up in the next 2 minutes, we can proceed. We do have quorum.
I'll just say I read your email, Nelson, in regard to a response to our in-depth public hearing process. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And I will add in my email response to you, I will have said that it was a very good letter. Thank you.
Thank you.
I said it in front of your boss there. Do you notice that?
I appreciate that, Tom.
In case evaluation time is coming up or anything.
I'll give it 1 more minute. I just emailed him.
Shelley doesn't forget. She's like a comfort.
All right. I think everybody's here. Walter, are you ready to go?
Yeah. Sorry I'm late, guys. I was in the middle of a phone call here, so hopefully not too much happened during my absence.
No, we waited, but I'll, I guess, start the meeting now at 1:03, and we'll get started with the nominations for chair. So I'll begin by calling on the directors for anybody who wants to nominate the chair.
I'd like to nominate one of the newer directors to this party, Director Popoff.
And I guess, Walter, do you accept?
Frankly, I am fairly busy, but
Sorry,
in response,
Walter.
I'd like to nominate Director Newell. He is the newest member.
Okay, are you declining, I guess, the nomination, or are you not standing, Walter?
Yes, I am declining. I am fairly busy as it is.
And did I hear you nominate Director Newell?
Yes, I am nominating Director Newell.
And would you stand for that, Tom?
I don't know what's going on. I don't know anything, but I will try, unless I could try Director Jackman, but
Can I just provide some detail on this committee? It will probably
that would be helpful for me.
Sure. It will probably be meeting once a year. So I believe that's what's in the terms of reference.
That's typical, and then
Yeah.
In this year we'll probably be meeting a bit more frequently because we have some work to do to establish some of the, to repackage the governance documents from what was it, terms of reference into a policy document and procedures document. And then, of course, there's the other matter, the satisfaction survey. So there's some work that was requested at the last meeting, and we're going to continue that discussion. So I think those are the business items that we would be touching on as well.
Well, certainly those aren't what I would consider my strengths if the chair were needed in any way, shape, or form. Could I just, since we're informal small group, could I just ask Gary if he would be willing to, not to put pressure on you at all, Gary? And I'm not asking the chair because she's got so much on her plate as board chair that I'm not being rude, Amy. I just just know you've got a lot on your plate.
We're
And
not
you
really
do too, Gary.
following procedure very well here, but what if I decline? Because I think you'll do fine, Thomas. It's not a lot of meetings, so.
Okay, I'll accept.
Okay, thank you,
Gary
Tom.
declined, then I'll accept.
Okay, I'll call a second time for other nominations.
Nelson, I'd say
Director-
you've been through 4 directors, so, oh, sorry, Popoff, go ahead.
Yeah, Director Popoff here. So I'd like to name, one of the newer people that are on our board, Cheryl Graham.
And Cheryl, would you accept that nomination?
Walter, I'm sick as a dog right now. I've got just the worst flu that I've had in my life. Like, I barely could get out of bed to come here right now, so I'm just not in the shape. Like, if I wasn't sick, maybe, but right now I just can't. I'm just like, I can barely get out of bed.
Oh, thank you, Cheryl. That settles that.
Okay, I guess I'll ask for a third time if there's any other nominations besides Director Newell. And hearing none, I guess it's over to you, Director Newell. And I wonder, just to get us organized here, I was going to call for just a 5-minute recess, and then I can get organized and give you a call, Director Newell.
Give me a call.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to discuss some of the agenda before we get started. Or actually, we can stay open too if you prefer. I just wanted to note an addition to the agenda.
It's a public meeting. You have to discuss that as an open item.
For sure, yeah.
Okay. Well, do you want to? Well, why don't we dive into it and then take a pause if it gets complicated?
Sounds good.
Do we? So you have to declare me.
Okay, because we're not going to vote, so I now declare Director Newell as the Local Conservation Fund Committee Chair for 2025. And we don't need to destroy the ballot since there aren't any. And we can now move over to, it's your meeting now, Director Newell. And I just have an item I want to discuss with you about the agenda.
Okay. Well, why don't we do our traditional lands acknowledgement? And we respect, honor the indigenous peoples within whose territory we're meeting today. And we have an agenda, and I'd turn it over to staff to see if there's any additions to the agenda. Go ahead, Nelson.
Thank you, Director Newell. I just want to note that we should, at the end of the meeting, schedule our next meeting. And so that's an item that could come after public time and before adjournment. And then that way we could arrive
Let's
at
do it now. What would
Okay.
you like to propose?
Sorry, can I just, I do
Yes.
not want us doing calendar comparisons in this meeting. Can you just send a doodle poll for the next meeting?
Oh,
Yep, Shelley's on it.
Thank you.
great,
We
good
have to keep our
suggestion.
timeline pretty good.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent idea.
I think
So is that dealt with then, Nelson?
Yeah,
Next meeting? Doodle poll.
yeah. And so I guess we'll just note for the minutes, the next meeting to be determined.
Okay, that's awesome. All right, so minutes. Were there great minutes, by the way, for someone who wasn't there? It was very helpful. Thank you. And anything we'd like to add to the minutes or subtract prior to those going to the board for approval and acceptance? thanks for the questions. And as I say, can we, Nelson and or Sangita, could we have minutes that are similar to that included the discussion points today? Like, can we do that? Is that the pattern of this committee?
So yeah, through the chair, we took those were meeting notes, and that was prior to the committee being formed. And so we have to follow the protocols for preparing agendas and minutes similar to other committees. So I think the other one I did action items. She did action items. So we could add action items to the agenda as they come up, so we can track them. That could be something, but a resolution would work as well.
Well, yeah, in addition to the minutes, kind of meeting notes. Anyway, we meet once a year. It's good to have a flavor of the discussion. At least I found it really valuable, and maybe others may have coming back to it a year later. So that if we can include that somehow, then
Sure.
we've got minutes that we do. Action items arising, that's good. And then maybe just a taste of the discussion or issues would be good too, maybe.
Chair Newell, I just wanted to note, Shelley had something to add?
No, I can do that.
Oh, she was just giving a thumbs up to that
Thanks.
suggestion.
Oh, great, Shelley, thank you. All right, I'm high needs. I know a high needs chair. But anyway, you elected me, so, or was it acclaimed? But anyway, either way, here I am. So anyway, with that business out of the way, can I, all those in favor of, we don't do this. I think we said we were in favor of the agenda. I don't know if we voted on it, but if there's no opposition, we'll carry on to our delegation. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to the fund people and the program. And Kendall, your name is there, so take it away.
Thank you, Chair Newell. I'm just going to share screen here and do a quick check.
Yeah.
To make sure that you're seeing the right thing here.
Could I just add, just to ask questions, okay? I don't want to monitor chat. I think with 6 of us, we can keep things under control by just saying, hey, I have a question. If that works, let's do that, please. So I'll mute now, and Kendall, go ahead, please.
So Chair Newell, if I may interrupt you for a second here, do we not need a motion to adopt the agenda with the addition for the next meeting and by a doodle poll?
I think I said I informally said there didn't appear to be any opposition, but you're correct. Can we have is there a motion to accept the agenda as amended? Director Popoff moved, Jacqueline seconded. Any opposition?
Sorry, we opted to not do calendar comparisons in this meeting and asked staff to do a doodle poll. So that is not added to the agenda. It's direction to staff to send us a doodle poll to plan the next meeting.
Great. So the agenda is as is, and we're going to have a doodle poll. Thanks, Chair. So with that unaffected agenda change thing, is there any opposition? Seeing none, the agenda is adopted. Minutes will go to the board, and Kendall will lead us through. Thanks, Director Popoff.
Thank you, Chair Newell. So my name is Kendall Benish, and I work with Kootenay Conservation Program along with Juliette Craig, KCP's program director, who's in the room there today. And thank you for having me speak today. As you know, KCP works in partnership with the RDCK to administer the RDCK Local Conservation Fund. And I'd like to first acknowledge that KCP works within the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Ktunaxa, Syilx, Sinixt, and Secwepemc peoples who've guided and continue to guide stewardship in this region. So in today's presentation, I will include a quick overview of the 2025 Local Conservation Fund project proposals, along with the Technical Review Committee recommendations, the amount of available funding that was indicated for this year, along with the total funding ask, and a few other updates from KCP. And I won't be going into detail on the full Local Conservation Fund process because I believe you're all familiar with that, along with the technical criteria. All of those are detailed in the current fund's terms of reference, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. So the process for this year's service was very similar to previous years. We opened the call for proposals in August by placing ads in the Nelson Star, Valley Voice, Eashore Main Street, and Pennywise, and shared it via KCP's monthly e-news, which now has over 1,700 subscribers, our social media channels, and via email to previous project applicants, local stewardship organizations, First Nations, local governments, and others. And I'll note that this was the first year that we had the opportunity to open up project proposals to electoral area F, which was exciting. We received 8 proposals in total, and then we hosted our technical review committee meeting on November 26th in Nelson. And I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the level of expertise and the dedication of the fund's technical review committee. They really do provide incredible insights into the evaluation criteria and the projects and enable us to be confident in the recommendations that go forward to the RDCK. And all of the information I'm providing today on the projects is within that larger report that KCP has provided to the RDCK, including those technical review committee recommendations. As mentioned, this year there were 8 proposals submitted. 2 of these were new projects that had not been applied for funding before. And in the report to the RDCK, we also summarize which projects take place in each electoral area. And I'll be providing a brief overview of each of these projects momentarily. Of the total 8 new proposals, the full ask for funding was just about $143,000. And prior to this process, the RDCK indicated that approximately $145,000 would be available for funding. And of those 8 new proposals, all 8 were recommended for funding with reduced funding for 2 of the projects, which I'll be discussing. So now I'll be providing that overview of the 8 proposed projects, and I'm going to be presenting them from highest to lowest ranking. And again, details can be found in the report that we've submitted to the regional district. So first up is Wildlife Conservation Society Canada's Enhancing Bat Habitat and Monitoring Project, which aims to restore natural habitats for bats in the West Kootenay and better understand how to mitigate the impacts of habitat loss that has occurred. So they'll be doing this through creating and assessing artificial and modified trees for enhancement of bat roosting habitat and monitoring for changes in baseline species diversity and abundance. And the recommendation to directors was that the project addresses multiple species conservation and habitat needs for bats. It's a strong proposal that builds on existing work, and it's a strong team with demonstrated success through previous projects.
I have questions on this one.
Yes. Thank you,
Okay.
Director Watson. Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of ones. First of all, the area, it says areas D, E, F, and H, but the detail indicates it's only in area H. Can you verify that?
Yes, so Wildlife Conservation Society Canada has done work throughout the West Kootenay, and I believe they're monitoring, existing monitoring actions will be taking place across those other electoral areas. They are focusing on creating new roosting habitat in Area H, including some Brandon bark and tree modifications on the Elk Root Conservation Farm Society property.
Okay, and then my next question, I'm assuming Chair Newell, you said just roll with it. You're good with that? Okay, cool. Is that I see that ONA also has an application for bat enhancement, and I'd much prefer not to do duplicate projects that are separate and siloed. So how did the Technical Review Committee oversee the fact that we have 2 applications for bat habitat from 2 distinctly different organizations?
Yes, thank you, Director Watson. So this was a similar situation as last year where there were 2 bat projects that had been proposed for, and the Technical Review Committee has has identified that there are two bat projects, but they have two different scopes. So previous to the last couple of years, the work that ONA is doing with Kootenay Community Bat Program was sort of lumped together with this project, but the Wildlife Conservation Society Canada project is very much focusing on creating natural roosting habitats for bats. So that's doing the larger baseline monitoring, species abundance and diversity, large scale, as well as doing the natural habitat features, installing Brandon bark and creating natural roosting structures in trees. Whereas the ONA project is very much focused on replacing anthropogenic habitat that's being lost. For example, when barns are being torn down, they're creating the new bat condos to create new artificial roosting structures, and also has the large public facing component of it. So that includes the Kootenay Community Bat Program, all of the local bat counts, all of the local landowner engagement in terms of coexistence with wildlife. So they do have two different scopes, and they also acknowledge that there are so many different species of bats. It would be they're different bat focal species, for example. So the technical review committee does see it as two separate projects, although they have asked for the proponents in future years to better clarify how the two projects are complementary to one another and not overlapping.
Okay, one final comment and last question, and then I'll move on.
Yes.
Jackman has one as well. One is that I will be very cautious over separate funding when bats are bats. I'm not a scientist, so I can understand what the technical review committee was doing. I appreciate that. But we need conservation environmental efforts to be collaborating and working together to make sure that they're not duplicating. I think you've addressed that, but I would agree with the TRC that they need to be working together and show how they complement each other. And my last question is just, does this supplement anybody's private enterprise? Is there, like, I know for this funding, you can't be an individual that applies, but is there capital being built on private property that is then owned by the private property owner? And that might be a general question for the KCP, not just specific to this one. Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Director Watson. So this project will be or is planning on creating some roosting structures on the Elk Root Conservation Farm Society property. And it also has created wildlife structures on conservation lands, for example, that are owned by the Nature Trust of British Columbia. And that the Elk Root Conservation Farm Society is owned by individuals, and then it is established as a conservation farm where there are several conservation related projects taking place. This project, it has the roost enhancement structures, and then the ONA project has created a bat condo on that same property. So it is on private property, and there are other restoration projects, for example, that have taken place on private land through the RDCK Local Conservation Fund. For example, the Crooked Horn Farm project that took place last year was on a private property as well.
I have more, but I'll wait.
No, go ahead. Let's while you're on a roll.
Don't get me on a roll, Newell. I just want to be respectful to Jackman. I think my only comment on that, Kendall, is that I understand that. I think when I ran the Farmer Innovation Program in Area D, and so there were public funding going to farmers, which was part of that economic boost. And as long as we had an open intake, that was fine. Like, I don't think we're doing anything wrong. But when it comes to actual infrastructure, I don't necessarily have a yes or a no to it, but it does raise a flag for me about if those properties sell fee simple and then that asset is no longer being used for the intended purposes. If there's a way we can somehow think about what to do with that. Because I think we need to ensure that when all this work goes into things like bat habitat, that if it sells next year because stuff happens, that habitat isn't lost. That infrastructure is still being used as it's intended. I don't know what that looks like. So that's just my final comment.
Thank you, Director
Yeah, and
Watson.
I think just as chair, I'll just add to it, it's a good point because not all conservation can happen on public land, crown land, or whatever. And sometimes it's, hey, cleaning something up, but sometimes it is actually building infrastructure. So I think it raises an unfortunate point that we, as using tax and public funds that we have to consider, which I hadn't thought of at all. So thanks for raising that, and we'll kind of carry on. Director Jackman?
Yep.
Go ahead,
Thanks,
please.
Chair.
And Director Popoff, I see your hand.
So on the third one, a little later, I'm going to ask a question about private property versus not. Just observing that if we, we've provided about 186,000 to these two groups through this fund already. If both of these go through, it'll be a high set of 228,000. So I'm thinking it's more than just a recommendation that they work together. That is much stronger language needs to be used. That there needs to be common coordination, because there will be an advantage to that. And if the organizations can't work together in a common interest, then maybe we need to find other ways to spend the money. Because I really do, I get concerned about isolationism, and somebody thinks they got the best idea, the best program. They need to talk to their neighbors. So strong language would be the way I would put it. Otherwise, if we're sitting here a year from now looking at another $50,000 contribution to the same pair of programs, then you really have to start to question what can be saved. 5 or 10,000 a year, maybe, through coordination. Leave it there for this one.
Thank you, Director Jackman. And I will note that the two organizations, the Kootenay Community Bat Program and Wildlife Conservation Society Canada, do work closely together. Wildlife Conservation Society Canada has stepped away from supporting that more anthropogenic and landowner centric role, which I believe is why they separated into two applications instead of going under one. But that's something that we can absolutely share with those project proponents. And thank you for noting that.
Go ahead, Director Popoff. Oh, just a second. Could I just, before, Director Jackman, could you talk again? You were crackly like you were that other meeting, you remember? And I just wonder if you might need, so try talking again.
I might have to dump my video. This computer's been on for hours and hours, and it tends to overheat.
But you're good now. You're good now. So I think you're okay. So let's just carry on for now.
I'll shut off some other programs.
I don't think it was your voice. I do think it was the computer
machine.
But anyway, go ahead, Director Popoff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with Director Watson about structures on private land, and I was a little bit hesitant about providing some funding that initially Elk-Root Conservation Farm Society, and that was my question about the ownership of the land. It is a not-for-profit society, and I unfortunately did not get a concrete answer on that. And they're doing a lot for the area, but the property is fee simple. On dissolution of the society, what happens to the infrastructure that was built with basically public funds? So I really don't have an answer. I don't know, Kendall, whether you did investigate that, what happens with the dissolution of the society, because the structures are on private property. Who owns them eventually, or if somebody buys the property?
Thank you, Director Popoff. Two other things I was going to note. So we haven't investigated or looked into if specifically at Elk-Root Conservation Farm, if they were to sell that property, what would happen with that piece of infrastructure. I'm not sure what type of information is on the title relevant to that, but just something else that came up as well is that on some of the projects, landowners do enter into stewardship agreements with the project proponents, for example, at the Crooked Horn Farm. So that's something else that could be discussed as well. But for this project specific, that's something we could get information on and come back to you and let you know if there is any information on their title around if if that property sells, what will happen to the existing infrastructure, because it's my understanding that they've had other funding sources contribute not only to the bat habitat enhancement, but to other conservation infrastructure as well on the property.
Well, thank you. And I was one of the other forces that did contribute initially to get them a start. And I know they're doing a good thing, but that was always a concern in the back of my mind. And now that they're expanding further or whatever, it'd be nice if we can investigate that, maybe have some kind of agreement in place.
Absolutely. And Chair, if I can just say one more thing relevant to the bats that I think could be helpful, and just to sort of frame the bat, having two bat projects it is sort of similar to having two ungulate projects or two bird related projects. So for example, if there were a project focused on elk versus on mule deer, or on osprey versus swallows. So that could sort of help put some of that into context as well. But I do absolutely understand the comment around ensuring that these organizations are working together in the most collaborative and efficient way possible on this project.
Okay, I was going to ask one question. I'm just seeing if anyone else's hands up or whatever. Is there a record of the success of these bat projects? Is there any way of assessing their effectiveness? I didn't see that. I might have missed it in my readings.
Yeah, great question, Chair Newell. So the Wildlife Conservation Society Canada does closely monitor all of their habitat enhancement structures. So in their proposal, you'll see that there is telemetry monitoring as well as guano capturing, so they can see where the individual bats are moving, which roosts they're using, what type of habitat, and which species through genetic sampling are using their new structures. They don't specifically report out on all of those details in the local conservation fund reports, but that's certainly information that we can get to you in terms of the number of species and sort of numbers of bats that are using these newly installed habitat features. There were a few notes in their last report indicating there were some new species found through their roosting structures and some good successes in terms of that. And the overall larger picture is included in their more comprehensive reports.
Thank you. All right, onward.
Okay, so application number 2 is the Elkroot Conservation Farm Society's Pollinator Highway Project, Year 2. And this is a phased approach to enhance the native biodiversity of plants and pollinator species and increase the distribution of those species in the Slocan Valley. And the project aims to reduce and manage threats to biodiversity, such as transportation corridors and invasive plants, monitor the successful establishment of native plants at the project site, and use the results of phase 1 to establish best practices for future expansion of this project at a later date. And the recommendation to directors was that it's a well-written proposal with clearly defined objectives and activities. There's good cost sharing and partnerships. And they noted that the project is providing meaningful work opportunities for local residents and youth interns in the Slocan Valley.
Question. You're muted, Noel.
I also have a question after Director Watson.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. So I was just curious, sorry, Kendall, I'm just reading the 2024 accomplishments. I realize they do final reports, correct? But they go to KCP.
They do, and they were just submitted at the end of January, and we reviewed them and submitted them all to the RDCK and filed them on your shared Dropbox.
Okay, we don't have access to those, so maybe just a note to staff if those could be included in future agendas, that would be great. So essentially my question is just, this is I know pollinators aren't like a 1 year and you've got them back. It's an ongoing thing, but I'm just curious, out of their accomplishments, were they able to actually use any metrics to indicate that they've increased the pollinators in the area?
At This time, I don't believe so. It is sort of a longer term phased approach in terms of doing initial insect surveys. And I know for year 2, they're planning on doing more of those invertebrate surveys to more closely document the pollinators that are existing and to see that change over time. Their focus for the first year was really on increasing native plant diversity and abundance within the study area, mitigating the threats mostly around invasive plants, and really seeing if this type of approach for increasing pollinator habitat and subsequently increasing pollinator diversity and abundance is possible through this type of project.
Okay, I'll just note that it's great to see they're working with Ministry of Transportation. That is where we tend to see the biggest erosion of ecosystems. So that's good. It'd be great to see some metrics that are a little more trackable for us. And I know that's difficult to do. It's not like you can count each butterfly and each bee and know that they're not the same bee. I get that. But I think just overall, I'm not sure how we would do this, but I'm grateful that they're doing this. This is a really critical piece of the ecology, and it needs to not be limited to one property. Area H is massive, D is massive. We all have massive properties. So how do we solicit this kind of work being replicated in areas where those pollinators, which do not stick to this one area, could be supported with multiple lots? So that's just more of a general, I don't know how we do that, but I think this would have a lot more bang for buck if we saw several areas doing this in strategic locations.
Thank you, Director Watson. And I believe that is the plan. So using this as sort of that pilot study site and hopefully being able to get a system and a model that works and being able to effectively expand it to other areas of the Slocan Valley.
One final just idea on that is working with organizations like the Kootenay Boundary Farm Advisors and Central Kootenay Food Policy Council, making those connections where like I'm sure we have some nonprofit societies in the Lardo Valley that might not realize that they could be partnering on this to mimic and learn from each other. So those entities have a pretty good grasp on who's out there farming that could be replicating some of this conservation work. So that might be a good connector.
Thank you, Director Watson. And that was the KBFA and then the Central Kootenay Food Council. Thank you.
Was it Director Popoff had a question?
Yeah, sure. To follow along the lines of Director Watson's questions and everything else, like when they say highway, and I tried to get a definitive answer, I couldn't get a definitive answer. What is their defined area for this pollinator highway in Area H?
That is a great question, Director Popoff. I know their existing site is on the Lower Passmore Road, and they're planning on expanding to one area, investigate sites for one additional area this year, but I'm actually not sure of their entire proposed study area, if it includes the entire Slocan Valley, but that's something we can seek clarity on.
Well, thank you. That would be nice, good information for us to know, how far are they spreading apart? And along with Director Watson's, it's sort of a pilot project, and it depends what kind of ground that they're using, whatever, that it can be used throughout the whole regional district. That's, from my point of view, that would be the intent, is to expand it further. But until we know, like, I'm quite familiar with the area where they're in, but are they going further beyond just the develop? I don't expect an answer. I trust you will look into it and maybe get back to us and let us know specifically, are they expanding further?
Absolutely. Thank you, Director Popoff.
Great. Okay, well, thank you for that. So it looks like we can move to the next one, Kendall.
Thank you, Chair. The next project is the Slocan River Streamkeepers Riparian Restoration Project, which aims to create habitat for wildlife, improve aquatic health, and restore the riparian cottonwood ecosystem along the Slocan River, specifically at 3 sites that have already had some sections of restoration activities in the past. The goal is to plant 1,000 native trees and 1,000 live stakes along the Slocan River on 3 separate properties, which adds up to over 1 hectare of restored riparian area, over 700 meters of riverbank. They'll also protect these plantings from beavers, install bird boxes, and conduct invasive plant management activities. And the recommendation to directors is that the organization has strong local support, a good track record, and demonstrated success from previous restoration work, and the project has a prominent on-the-ground focus.
Yes, go ahead, Director Jackman.
Thank you. Through the chair, this is where I'll ask my question about, are
Yes.
any or all of these sites private land, or is it Crown?
I believe these sites are private land. And Slocan River Streamkeepers has worked with them in the past, and I can't currently pull up the information I have because I'm in the slideshow mode on my computer, but I believe they also enter into stewardship agreements with the landowner. So they're obviously not legally binding contracts, but they are agreements with them to ensure that they will maintain this restoration effort over time.
Okay, because that's the one important point, because we had talked about that, and I've always thought we need to be putting some of this funding towards making sure those kind of agreements are in place. If it can't go untitled, at least to have some kind of longevity to the arrangement. And, you know, we've discussed this with Julie in the past. We discussed it with David before Julia took on the role. It's a question from day one. So the other thing is then, are they subject to watercourse development permits that even though the groups may think they know what they're doing, you try and get one of my private clients on a construction site to get away from the environmentally sensitive development permit or watercourse development permit process, and that's trouble. We even forgot to do it for one of our own sites in Crawford Bay. So are they aware that they need to go through planning? Is it in an area, or maybe Sangita would know for sure, where they can't just go plant trees in the riparian area? Regional district has a requirement for all private landowners to go through that there has to be some oversight.
Thank you, Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the area, I believe, which is on the river, does not have an official community plan. That's H step, does not currently have an official community plan.
Thank you.
So that means no permit required, I guess, if that's not obvious, Kendall.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Good point. Yeah, Director Pop, supplemental, Gary? You're good. Director Popoff.
Yeah, I can probably expand on that because I've been working with the streamkeepers for, I don't know, the last 15 years or so. And what they're doing is they're trying to address erosion along the river. And what Manager Sudan says, because there is no official community plan, so we don't have development permit areas. But it is in the riparian section of that. And basically, they should not go and destroy those trees or whatever. And we've dealt with that in Slocan Park, and Nelson probably can attest that they have to go to the board to get approval to do any kind of construction or destruction of the riparian area. So there is some protection for that. And I do understand, I don't know if they have an agreement with the landowner per se or not, but they do need the landowner's permission to go out there and do that. And they work in conjunction with the landowner. So maybe Kendall can expand whether there is some kind of agreement with the landowner when they do a riparian area restoration and protection for future erosion.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Director Popoff. It was a little bit chopped, but I think I understood your question again about putting stewardship agreements in place. And it's my understanding that the Slocan River Streamkeepers, one, because they have been active in the area for so long and have these very well-established relationships with landowners, they do work very closely with them in terms of communication and doing the restoration planning. And I believe there are stewardship agreements that are put in place. I'm not sure for these 3 properties these specifically, but again, that's something I can look back in our other documents on and seek clarification from the stream keepers if required on if they are doing stewardship agreements. And I know, for example, the project from last year at Crooked Horn Farm, that's another example where a stewardship agreement was put in place with the landowner as well. So it's very top of mind for the proponents that are doing restoration projects on private land to ensure that that conservation investment is being maintained and cared for over time.
I have a comment as well. If Walter was done, you're good.
Yep, go ahead.
Just to clarify that even though development permit areas might not apply via the RDCK, anything working in a stream, I would assume, and hopefully they know that works in a stream do fall under the watershed sustainability branch. And so there are other considerations for permitting that we of course don't have any oversight on, but just to be clear that there are some that may apply. RDCK does not have a DP in this area.
Thanks.
Thank you, Director Watson. And that does commonly come up because the Technical Review Committee has been working. Many of them have experience in restoration works, both in wetland riparian areas and otherwise. It is often a discussion at the table to make sure that where appropriate, proponents are applying for the appropriate permits and that time frame as well is built into the projects.
And not that we have limitless rabbit holes we could go down here. With that, so when you do a funding agreement, does it include the checkbox that says they are applying for all applicable regulations, permits, and whatnot, so that KCP is ensuring that the funding is contingent on following the rules? I mean, it's generally inherent, but I think we need to make sure those are in our funding agreements.
Did you answer, Kendall, or nod, or?
No, sorry, yeah, just to clarify,
That's us.
KCP doesn't, doesn't do the contribution agreements. That's through the regional district, and I don't believe there is a checkbox for specific to permitting.
So yeah, my apologies, that should go through to staff. Can we make sure those boxes are on those funding agreements?
Nelson?
Yeah, I would say that that's a good catch and something we could add to the contracts if it's not there already and you're experiencing it.
No, through the chair, no, I don't believe there's language in our current agreements. Something we'll have to
I
talk
think it's a
to
good idea.
the corporate officer about amending those agreements.
Please, and I would encourage that we do that for this year, because we don't, it's, unfortunately, I'm not sure how we missed that, but that's a pretty important one on funding agreements. I believe we have it in our basic ones for other contribution agreements.
Got it. All right. So let's move to the next one then, Kendall.
Thank you, Chair. Next is BC Wildlife Federation's Wetland Restoration Project, which aims to enhance the Crooked Horn wetlands that were constructed in 2024, as well as assess an agricultural site in Meadow Creek for wetland restoration. So they'll do this by enhancing the Crooked Horn site with more native plants, invasive plant management, wildlife habitat, and wildlife-friendly fencing to protect that restoration investment, as well as monitoring. And they would also like to assess up to 1.8 hectares of private land for potential restoration in Meadow Creek. And the recommendation to directors is that it is nice to see the project taking place at Meadow Creek with support from local landowners, and appreciate the inclusion of stewardship agreements to protect restoration efforts.
Awesome. Yep, go ahead.
My apologies.
No.
So with this one, I have two things. One is, I know I don't have the authority to do this, but I really, really want to be clear that the public is asking for no pesticide use from CKIS, any invasive management. I know this isn't CKIS, but any invasive species management, any land works whatsoever that we support, please we do not want pesticides used in the Lardo Valley. There's actually a petition that's being initiated at this time. So I'm using this opportunity to communicate that through to any proponents, because I do see invasive species as part of their work. The other thing is that we have several wetlands in the north end of the lake, and we've had a mixed response from how effective they've been. So with our mosquito service, which is using organic BTI, so yes, it's a pesticide, it's organic BTI, it's host specific. I've done all the work to verify it's very, very non-invasive, but I do catch that can be a, what do you call that? Catch-22 on my part. With the work over in that, we've seen, because these wetlands can, if not constructed properly, actually increase mosquito larvae, which then increases the need to abate, which then increases the cost of the service. And so in previous work with Nature Trust and the other areas that have these wetlands, we've had local residents who are actually experts in the field. I'm just the one that collects the information and tries to understand as best as possible. Work with those constructing the wetlands to show and ensure that they're done in a way that has a fluid, like a flow through of water, opposed to creating wetlands that create a standing water situation. So all of that to say that I would really appreciate if the BC Wildlife Federation worked with those people. My guess is that the property that's doing this likely is already in that loop, because they were part of the people that raised the issue on the initial construction. But that this would be one that I'd have those two flags on. Please do not use any pesticides for invasive species control. And also that they coordinate maybe just with Nature Trust, who actually worked quite a bit with us to kind of ensure the wetland creation was not creating a standing water situation. The complication is that in the Lardo Valley, every year the water flows differently, depending on the Lardo flows and the Duncan flows, which can really alter where that standing water is versus the flowing water. So it gets a little complicated. That's probably more than you need to know, Kendall, but that's just some of the background, and wanted to let you know about that.
No, that's great, Director Watson. Thank you. So I'll just briefly speak to the invasive plant management because this is a wetland riparian site. The opportunities to use herbicides is very limited because it's very regulated around water. There's only one pesticide or herbicide that could be used. And as far as we know, all of the invasive plant management strategies in the riparian and wetland sites are all hand pulling. But that's something we can absolutely include in our letter to the proponent and make sure that's clear. And then very interesting point about the mosquito control that I have not thought about and has not been spoken about at the technical review committee area. So again, that's something we can include in our information to the proponent if they are successful in funding. And that's a great thing for us to be aware of as well in terms of wetland restoration projects moving forward to make sure that they're mitigating that and ensuring flow of water.
Thank you, Kendall. And it's a really long 12-year history on that whole program. So I'd be happy to offline provide any background you might be interested in or the TRC might be interested in, and also for the proponents. If I know the land it's on, which you don't have to tell me now, I think they're probably already connected, so it should be good. But if not, we definitely had wetlands constructed that did the opposite of what they were intending. And a lot of that had to do with the water table that is not well documented just by the nature of the ecology up there in a dam.
Thank you.
Chair, can I speak?
Yes.
So through the chair, on the question that was asked previously, there is actually language in the agreement about making sure that they're in compliance with other regulations and acquire the appropriate permits. So sorry for my confusion there.
Excellent. Thanks for checking on that. Good. Thank you. All right, so we're anything else on BC Wildlife Federation, invasives, wetlands, trying to deal with invasives. My brief time at CKIS in wet areas is quite the challenge. But I know people don't want pesticides or herbicides on their property. So, and mosquitoes. It's so interesting. I guess we live in an integrated environment where one thing leads to another. That's a really good point. I think that's it for this one. So perhaps we can move to the next one, Kendall. Thank you.
Excellent. So this is the Okanagan Nation Alliance's project where they're partnering with Kootenay Community Bat Program to enhance bat habitat connectivity by restoring and protecting artificial roosting habitats. So they're identifying new bat roosts, establishing and monitoring known roosts, and engaging landowners in conservation efforts. And this project includes the construction of 2 bat roosting structures or bat condos and monitoring previously constructed ones. So the recommendation to directors was that the proposal is clear and well written. The project is being executed by a qualified team with a proven track record, and they appreciate the partnerships developed through previous work. They did note in their comments that they would have liked that further clarification again on how this project is complementary to Wildlife Conservation Society Canada's project. And they also wanted to note that all of the project funds will be spent within the RDCK Local Conservation Fund service area. As part of their larger project, they're also doing some construction closer to Creston, but these funds will not be used for that. So they wanted to make that clarification as well.
Thank you. Fantastic projects. All right. We can always come back if your question pops up. So let's go to the next one, Kendall. Thank you.
Excellent. So this is the Central Kootenay Invasive Species Society's Broom Busters project, which its goal is to establish a long-term model for a community-led invasive plant removal or pulling together events in the Central Kootenays. So the project builds on the momentum and lessons learned from their pilot project last year in 2024, and they're working on expanding the program. And the recommendation to directors was that it was a well-written, concise proposal with a good team and demonstrated success from last year, and it builds on that previous project work, and they appreciated the strong community engagement component of the project.
Thank you. Okay,
Sorry.
we've got, just speak up. You two decide who goes first. Chair can't handle that kind of.
Gary, you go ahead. I'm always going first.
Sure. I'm looking for the reactions button to put my hand up. On this one, I noticed Ganole Creek is now flagged. I know we have a lot of issues around Riendell where there's been heavy logging. Ganole was logged a few years back while I was doing a house project down below it. I'd be interested in getting feedback as they're working in these areas. Are these a lot of logging cut patches that we're seeing this accelerated spread of Scotch broom? And if so, is the ministry going to start talking to these, whoever's harvesting about maybe chipping in some money for weed control? I know they're right now, I've looked it up a few times. It's monitor. That's all they care for Scotch broom is monitor. But some of these areas where they've been partially cleared seems to be where it's taking off. And if you look at the East Shore, there was 7 kilometers from there to there burned a couple summers ago. And if broom catches on in there, it'll just spread like literally wildfire. So I'd love to see the feedback or observations. Where are these problems worst? And is every time there's a project, are they talking to some of the ministry officials about whether or not maybe whoever's in there last with heavy equipment should be responsible for some of these projects?
Great note, Director Jackman. It's my understanding that CKIS works closely with the province, and they do receive annual funding for treatments on public or Crown land. And as you noted, all of the invasive species have different categories of priority for treatment. Scotch broom, because it is more well established, there is less of that sort of provincial or public funding for that, which is why they've created this project to help supplement the work that they're doing through the province and through other funders in community areas that are being impacted. I can definitely follow up with CKIS specifically about the conversations that I've had, but I guess just sort of through my own experience and conversations in the invasive species world, it is a very ongoing conversation and effort in order to both get more public funding for treatments on public lands to help maintain and reduce the impacts of invasive plants. And it is a very, a challenging and ongoing effort, but it would be interesting to know specifically the conversations relevant to this project in the province and how they're going about that. Forestry specifically, there's obviously differences between the different forest practitioners and the management plans, but I think it's pretty tough to get the forestry folks accountable as well for post-harvest treatments and monitoring, which I think also is a pretty ongoing effort that the invasive species councils connect with, specifically with the ministry and with forestry companies.
Well, so long as they, correlate the activities at every opportunity, because it is a big problem on the ridge behind us.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
I'm gonna
Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to build on what Director Jackman was saying. It wasn't actually my question, but it brings to my mind that this fund is not to be used to replace the responsibility of other orders of government. And I really want to emphasize that a lot of the work that we're seeing in invasive species, not to discredit CKIS or all the efforts they put into this, is actually dealing with poor land management by other authorities, whether that's Ministry of Transportation, whether that's forestry. And it really causes me concern, because if you just properly manage the land to begin with ecosystems in mind, we're not backfilling their poor decisions. So I know that that's not yours to solve, Kendall, but I really do raise a flag on that these should be addressed by good ecosystem management systems done through any management of Crown land, whether that's how Modi does their side cleaning to logging to, like, we're seeing it with mitigation programs with Fire Smart management in Crown land, where we use public funding to clean up a logging enterprise, which that's the cost of doing business. Just because the public's paying for it doesn't mean there isn't a cost there. So I raise that to my colleagues more so, that I think that this is really in that gray area of taking on responsibility of other orders of government, although the province would say it's not theirs. It's the land manager's responsibility to do it well, that you don't incur more invasive species, because this is never going to go away. It's going to get worse. So I wanted to thank you for reminding me of that, Director Jackman. I know that's not where you went with it. That's where I'm going with it. My question is, and I did read through it as quick as I could, I don't believe they're actually using pesticides on this when they are doing a pull program. And I believe we verified that before. I see you nodding. Last
Correct,
note,
Director Watson. Yeah.
From a medicinal plant perspective, which the first time I ever was introduced was Broome, was studying herbalism. It's a really great medicine. So there could be other ways that we could be using this plant while not increasing. Just a side note. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Watson.
Thank you. All right. Next slide.
All right, so the next project is Living Lakes Canada's North Kootenay Lake Climate Resilience and Water Monitoring Project, which aims to continue collecting long-term hydrometric and climate monitoring data in the North Kootenay Lake region, as well as continue building relationships with First Nations, engaging local youth, and communicating findings to the RDCK, the province, and local community members. So the recommendation for directors was that it's a well-written proposal with broad partner support and good cost sharing, and that it's timely and relevant work that addresses local conservation fund priorities with a focus that has long-term relevance to community well-being. They did note, however, that the add-on of the community wildfire risk reduction component is an additional benefit to the area, but it's not closely aligned with the priorities of the RDCK Local Conservation Fund. So the Technical Review Committee recommended project funding for $12,000 instead of $13,000, with the omission of that wildfire risk reduction component.
I'll comment on this one.
Mm-hmm.
So I will note that, again, another one where the province stopped doing water monitoring. They had 50 monitoring stations at one point, and now it's nonprofits doing it. This is valuable work. I don't debate it. But I think we're filling in gaps because the province stopped doing certain things. But that was many years ago, even before this fund was initiated. My main question though, and more so through to Director Popoff, I know that your area was very much interested in that. Essentially, it's the database that included all the PODs, the point of diversion and standpipes in Argenta. So this is the organization that did that, Director Popoff, but they did not do it with funding from this service. I believe they had funding through other sources, but just wanted to highlight for you, it was not RDCK funding that did that work. And sorry, Kendall, that's a sideline project because people are trying to replicate everything that happened in Argenta this summer, which is great. But for Walter to know that this is who did it with funding from not sure who, possibly CBT.
Okay.
Yeah, if I can respond to that.
Yeah,
is,
I was just
I know-
pausing for that. Yeah, go ahead, Walter, and then Gary. Go ahead, Walter.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair. Oh, I didn't see your hand up, Gary, otherwise I would have kept silent. But on that topic, well, the Living Lakes Canada is doing that project. They did that in Argenta. And the person that's working in the Slocan Valley with Living Lakes is Richard Johnson. I had a chat with him, and he is working with them and will be trying to extend it further in the Slocan Valley where that goes. So it's not going to be funded by RDCK. I have no intention of funding that at all. It's going to be a proposal that could be funded through either Living Lakes Canada or Columbia Basin Trust. So that's the direction that I'm going on that one. Thank you, Director Watson.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Director Popoff. Go ahead, Director Jackman.
Sure, thanks. And I guess this a little bit overlaps with Director Watson's, Amy's comment. You know, we're going 7-8 years supporting this project. I realize there's other money in it, but this is not our core work. And in terms of what's really important, I think understanding Arrow Creek is more important. People in Riendell, when I was there last night, were talking about the water supply and the golf course and upcoming summer. You know, we have from the 40s and 50s tons of monitoring data on Hendricks and Indian Creeks, but then nothing. So it's a gap everywhere. So are we going to set a time limit and say so many years and that's it? You need to find other funding, or need to put this to the province and say, if this is showing a significant trend in decrease or unreliable water flows, then the province needs to jump in there and say, okay, we recognize we need permanent gauges on this, this, and this creek. And yes, I do appreciate the work being done as a model, but it can't be endless. And obviously without the volunteer base that up in the north end of the lake, we can't possibly get the same value in any other creek. I mean, East Shore Freshwater Habitat Society tried to start doing this kind of work, but they kind of disintegrated through COVID. But we just can't keep funding these because we did last year or 7 years ago, as this is the case.
Yeah.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
And I just want to first apologize to Kendall because there's so many things coming up that I think are about the broader service, not necessarily applications. But I really agree with what Director Jackman just said from a needs perspective, because we're a grant-based service. It's based on who's applying. That is not always where the most need is. And I really appreciate the note about what's occurring in the Creston Valley right now, that we're doing a watershed sustainability plan. We're addressing the fact that they actually have serious water constraints, not to in any way suggest that this isn't important work, but it's not where the need is from a current immediate approach. And so again, to my colleagues, as we move forward, I think there's something to consider when it comes to how do we ensure these funds are really applied where the most need is, because it is really up to who applies, which isn't, now I'm repeating myself, I think you get the point. But I would love to see Arrow Creek have these monitoring, because that's where it's really critical. Not to say I don't want it in Area D, but I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
I was just going to note, that's a really great point about, of course, these are the projects that are applied for from the organizations and nations that have the capacity and the expertise and the knowledge able to do them. But comment notes like these, like For example, Directors Jackman and Watson, if you have suggestions or your constituents are telling you that this is where the need is or this is where we want more information, we're happy to share that information with Living Lakes Canada if that is appropriate, or of course would always encourage you to reach out directly to them to share that sort of urgency and need as well.
Right. So in other words, there's X number of groups, if you will, that have the capacity to take on some of these conservation projects. And we could, through contacts that we have or what we've heard, let these organizations know that this is what we're hearing as a priority to see if they might be interested in taking on a project such as that. Because yeah,
Absolutely.
so anyway, yeah. Is that kind of what we're saying here in a way?
Yeah, I'm going to expand a bit if I can.
Yeah, please, Gary. Yes.
So I had a conversation with the IDEG plants at Summit Creek a couple of years ago. I made it there, and I just briefly made it for the last one. And talking to Robin there about Robin Usher about the program. And so the kind of priority they get in longevity is they get like a 2 or 3 year promise of eggs, and they can do something and put them in. Well, the 1 year they misjudged the water levels, the ice buildup, and some of it was washed out, and they had poor results. They had better results in the Lower Goat. But they're only like 2 and 3 year provincial nods to here's a bit of money and here's something, and go ahead and do something. And then without the follow-up, without the long-term data collection to really understand what the success is, or a longer-term commitment actually to this is kokanee restoration in this particular case. So here we see a model for something that's not actually doing what we know needs to be done in terms of applying money, resources, expertise, and then doing it for multi-years. This is creating a model, but it's not actually doing the kind of work that we know needs to be done today in so many other locations. So absolutely, I've made some notes here. I'll scribble out some suggestions. Maybe we go out and invite groups and inform them and say, because that's what I tried to do with Robin Usher, standing there out in the side of the creek saying, you could have money if the province lets you down beyond next year. You could have money to continue with some good work and understand what worked and what didn't work. So the next time you get a bigger allocation, another few 100,000 eggs, that you will do better. But they're just out of the loop. They're just a bunch of volunteers who don't know who to talk to. Mm-hmm. So maybe we'll be sending them your way for education.
Please do. Yeah, we're always happy. And part of our sort of annual call for proposals, we talk to so many different individuals and groups and organizations about project ideas. And often many of them don't align with the fund's priorities, but often they do. The next project, for example, is a really good example of a project that was an idea through volunteers, and they were able to put together an application. So we can
And I funded this next group directly with discretionary grants, and I told them about you guys as well. So yeah, because they're in my area, Jackman. And I know exactly where this barbed wire is. You get off the highway at Boulder Creek there, and you can get wrapped right up. So, yep, please carry on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go to the next one. And thanks. That's yeah. Go ahead, Kendall.
All right, so this is the final proposed project. So this is Creston Valley Wild Sites Wire Fence Removal Project, which aims to identify and remove unmaintained and unwanted barbed wire from several properties that are hazardous to wildlife, blocking movement corridors, and where landowners are receptive to having the wire removed. And the recommendation to directors is that they appreciate it's a localized project and the connection to community concerns and inclusion of local anecdotes and information in the application. And it does have the potential to make an instant impact in terms of removing fence and promoting wildlife movement. They did note that it is a larger funding ask relative to the total project budget, with a small portion of the budget actually going to that wire fence removal, but also appreciate that it's the first time this project proponent is applying for funding and managing and running a project like this. And they recommended the project to be funded at a lower amount of $14,467, with the photographer fees to be removed from the LCF portion because they did not think that was relevant to the fund.
All right. Well, seeing Area A in Creston Valley, I don't know if either anyone knows, are areas B and C contemplating being part of this program ever? Has there been talk of their inclusion stretching it down to the
Area C, Kelly has shown some interest. I've chatted with him. The
Yeah.
criticality of that, the river delta essentially, because you look at Area A, and we don't we don't include the mouth of the Kootenay River as it enters the lake. There's a massive amount of highly sensitive lands. Even if this is Boulder Creek where they're standing in the photo, even that's sort of just on the fringe of Area A. It's
Right.
weird how the boundaries were drawn. And I know why. They wanted to capture a railway bridge as part of their taxation way back when people were divvying up the land. And Roger, I haven't had the conversation, but he spent his career in parks.
Yeah.
So he may be persuaded to put this question to the public. That's his whole background is parks and conservation.
Right. Thanks for that. Yes, Director Watson.
Yeah, I'm curious with this one because this is working with, it's great to remove these where they're needed, but what I'm curious about is, are they using any metrics to identify those in need versus those who could do this so that the money is spent most adequately to those with barriers?
Specifically thank you, Director Watson, in terms of the landowner's ability to remove the fence themselves.
Yeah, that it doesn't.
I don't believe they spoke to that specifically in the project, but their first exercise is to identify the areas where fence will be removed that will benefit wildlife the most, and then connect with landowners that are receptive and willing to have the fencing removed. And I'm not sure that's something I could mention to them and include in our letter if they're successful in funding, in terms of ensuring that resources are being used appropriately, in terms of aiding people who maybe are not as able to remove. I think they did mention, just through my conversations with the project proponent, that many of the landowners they've talked to are aging landowners that really don't have the ability to deal with these, as well as some newer landowners who've sort of inherited these pretty big jumbles and messes of barbed wire fences and are really don't have the capacity or interest to take it on themselves. So I think that was sort of the impetus for this too.
Thank you. I think it would be really important when we note that, without requesting private information, like you don't need to prove income or things like that, but it is really important to note that the funds are used in the most efficient way, so that if you have one property, like, Gary can handle fences, but maybe someone else can't, not to put you on the spot there, Jackman, but just using you as a capable example, that those metrics should be applied to who they're using their worker bee energy for. Because again, we're working in private property. Even with Fire Smart stuff, we can't fully achieve everything we need to achieve, and we have to use metrics that identify most in need versus those who can't do it. So with public funding, I think that needs to be pretty clear that, if you have someone that's more than capable of removing this fence, focus on where there are people that do not have the capacity to do that. That would be my inclusion, if we support this, to include that as part of the response.
And this same would apply to planting the 1,000 tree cuttings on the 3 properties in the Slocan. They've already done work. Maybe they're good.
I think that begs another bigger question for us, which is, as a grant intake process, we have a lot less kind of control over ensuring best use. we rely on third-party entities to do that. But I 100% agree with Director Jackman on that one. Like wherever public funding is being used for, which is general a public good, the ecosystem is a public good, but it is going on private property. I'm not sure how we do this, but maybe direction of staff to consider and for the committee to consider down the road is how do we ensure that that funding is going to those who cannot achieve this, who have not already received support, and that there is somehow a demonstrated need, again, without private information that is not ours to have access to. I think that's what you're saying, Jackman. Hopefully I went down the right road with that.
Pretty much. I mean, from day one, again, back to Dave Hillary and you know, ever since, I've supported that the who are willing to step up and do the right thing, that we should, even if it's private land, we should work with them. Maybe not spending the tens of thousands of dollars on their private land, but at least managing the paperwork and making the contacts and stuff like that. So you need to work with the willing. It seems as though there's a risk that we will be working with the privileged willing because they're in the know. Not to say they're rich or poor or anything, but they just have the privilege of knowing who to talk to, and so they get the money and they get improvements to their land, whether it's in the hands of a society, which is a private entity, or in the hands of a single landowner. It's kind of a privileged approach. And I know you advertise as broadly as you can, but it's only the people who know that what this means, what money this means they can get, that actually get that money. In terms of if they're standing at Boulder Creek, which I believe they are, and if you go on the maps, I got it open here. Boulder Creek is where areas A and C cut the line across the lake. And a lot of these fences are actually on the Crown side because they used to allow cattle grazing down there. And thankfully, that's been better controlled since. But yeah, it's a conversation we have to have, and KCP can't worry about it so much. But there maybe is a different way to do community outreach other than once a year saying, submit a proposal, which will scare most people and saying, oh, I can't write a proposal. What does that mean? Maybe it's more early in the year advertisement saying, did you realize there's organizations who can help you do better or help you get over some kind of a barrier or a block or some issue? You don't want to go into a government office and talk to anybody. Well, there's a non-governmental agency who can help you do better solving some of the problems on your land. And we don't want you to write a big proposal and have it technically reviewed. We just want to talk to you. And then maybe someone else will write that proposal on your behalf. So it's got to be a different way to talk to people about this stuff.
Thank you, Director Jackman. Taking lots of notes here. And yeah, we do certainly talk to a lot of private landowners that reach out to us as part of KCP and our broader stewardship solutions information that we have. And we're often connecting them with folks working on bats or with wetland restoration, and are, you know, hopeful that they'll connect with the right people and come up with some solutions for their properties. But I think that's a really great idea to figure out how we can sort of get the information out more broadly, that you can connect with organizations to achieve some pretty amazing conservation objectives on your private land, and you don't have to be deeply connected with these organizations or be a whole organization yourself.
Yeah, good point. All right, with the pause and the silence, I think that we can move on. Okay,
so in summary, we just went over those 8 proposals from 2025, and the Technical Review Committee recommended all 8 for funding, with reduced funding for those last 2 projects. And that means that the total ask for 2025, or total recommendation, was $139,767, which considers that reduced funding for 2 projects. And I also wanted to note that all of the project proponents do receive quite detailed feedback on their proposals, the same feedback that's presented in the report that we submitted, with the intention that they can use that feedback to improve their projects and apply again next year. And we've really seen the benefits of that over time, with some project proponents and their applications improving over time. So all of the feedback from the Technical Review Committee, the feedback that you directors provide in meetings like this, all gets packaged up and sent to proponents so that they can improve their projects and applications next year. I also just wanted to take a moment to give a few updates on engagement and outreach that KCP has been doing over the last year. So in April, KCP hosted a field tour as part of the AKBLG annual meeting in Radium to highlight LCF accomplishments in the region. We had really great feedback and overall had lots of folks attend, asked lots of great questions, and were able to highlight many of the successes of both the RDCK Local Conservation Fund as well as the one in the Columbia Valley. And it really brought some positive attention to local conservation funds in the region. There's also currently folks out in Metro Vancouver and on Vancouver Island who are looking into this service as a model. We've also been receiving some new project videos and photographs from the 2024 projects. So I'll be sending out an email to all the area directors, giving you access and showing you the new videos that have come up. And I'll probably send out a few photographs and a short summary document. You've already seen all of the project accomplishments or most of them in that larger report. But I have some updates from the 2024 final reports. And then I also wanted to share that Juliet and myself, we've been continuing to share information on local conservation funds in the Kootenays and beyond. And we're currently exploring options for funding new market research polling in areas that don't currently have the local conservation fund service, but we know there might be community interest. So the last market research polling that we of course used to help inform the referendum in Area H and the AAP in Area F, that was done in 2018. And we found that as we're talking to other areas, people do want to see updated information on constituent support. So that's something we're working on just sort of in the background. And then finally, KCP last year, as part of our KCP stuff, we updated our website, which includes a new RDCK Local Conservation Fund website. And we encourage you at any time to visit the new site and explore the information that's there. We have project profiles, we have funding summaries, and then of course, at any time, we have all of the information available on project reports, funding and leverage funds, and we keep track of project metrics. So if there's any additional information that you would like, we've got it. And that is it for me for this presentation, but I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you may have. And if there's, anything else that you would like to discuss. And thank you for all of the amazing questions.
All right. Any further questions? Juliet, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you, Chair. I think Kendall's done a fantastic job explaining the program and answering questions. So I don't have anything to add.
Yeah, she did a fantastic job.
I will say I've been also taking copious notes and really appreciating your comments and feedback and questions. So we'll definitely have some discussions around those.
Great. All right. Hey, I was thinking, Sangeeta or Chair, don't we need to recommend to the board something? Because I didn't see it on the agenda, and then I just dawned on me we somehow have to get this approval to the board, I think. Is that correct, Chair Watson?
Yeah, that should be. So we just had the delegation, which is item 6, but now we're going to go to 7.1.
But there was no
and that would be where we go through recommendations. And that it's kind of like we're, as the delegation leaves, then we get into the business, even though we did a lot of the business in the delegation. Yes,
Sure.
we need recommendations that go to the board.
All right. So delegation, you can stay, but you're now officially been politely escorted out because I don't see any more questions. So thanks, Kendall.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah, really, really good presentation. Thank you very much. And so now we go to 7.1. Is there a motion? Director Jackman, you're always good on your feet, just making up motions.
You sound like my grandkids. They accuse me like my kids used to, just making stuff up.
Yeah, make it up. Okay?
I don't know. I can't do any better than what the technical review committee did. So, I mean, I guess I could move that be recommended to the board that the 2025 allocations from the Kootenay Conservation Program, as outlined in the executive summary, be awarded or something like that.
I'll second that, just to speed things along. Is there any additions, people, or comments? Yes, go ahead, Director Watson.
Yeah, I'd like to amend it just to include that we gave significant input on feedback to the proponents. So as amended with the inclusion of this committee's input. So that got really wordy. I see Nelson.
Or a second motion that the committee's input be relayed to the applicants.
It could be a
Yeah,
separate.
maybe a
motion.
separation might be.
I think
So
what
let's approve this.
can I
If we
just
are,
clarify something?
yes, go ahead.
So I think most of our input is a piece of the contingency on approving these. A lot of that input, other than the loftier, how do we change what we do and how we do it? Aside from that, the specifics on the fund applications, those need to be a part of what we're approving. On these premises, this is what we approve. So through to staff, should that be a separate motion? Or should it be as part of the recommendation?
Through the chair, I was just crafting it in my head. It could go as one recommendation that the board approved the 8 projects proposed, and that additional information be communicated to the proponents. We can word it much more eloquently there, but we can do it as one motion. If
Would
that
it
works.
be subject to the comments from the committee being relayed to the applicants as, just being relayed to the applicants, subject to that information being relayed to the applicants and taken into account as they execute their projects?
We could also take a quick break and get the right wording and come back to it.
Yeah,
I like
and
two
I do have a
motions.
question. Does that include with the reduced funding for the 2 projects?
No, we don't need to, because the amounts are stated.
Yeah, the recommended amounts are reduced.
We're just approving the recommended amounts. They can read the report.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. I myself, like, we're not going to be able to, hey, check that everything, like, there's a certain amount of trust that this will be communicated. So I'm thinking we're approving the funds, and as a separate motion that the board is telling the program to communicate our concerns. Like, don't confuse them, but I don't know.
The more definitive direction would be that the KCP relay the committee's concerns to the applicants and request their responses.
Yeah,
And it's
as a
not
separate
open-ended.
motion, no?
I think it can still be separate because I don't have the expertise to say that anything I said should be followed by the people who do know what they're doing as experts.
Yeah,
So
there
to me,
you
it is
go.
separate.
Right, so I would, as we're thinking on our feet, we passed the motion and then gave direction to staff to communicate to the proponents those concerns that we raised. Then we're not muddying the water with the motion to the board. Like, they're like, are you giving them the money or not? The board is saying, right? And then we're saying through action to staff, we have these issues, concerns, the bad people work together, and that's a complicated thing. Could take months for them to collaborate, and they might come back to us and say, it's actually just because it's the word bat doesn't mean it's anywhere near the same project as we used as an example earlier with elk and caribou or whatever. It could be completely, they're both things that have hooves, but they're nowhere near the same project type of thing. So would that be, go ahead, Director Watson, get me out of this mess.
You don't need to talk about hoops. I proposed a motion in
But
chat.
it behooves us to talk about.
It does
Behooves.
behoove us. Okay, you get that one. You also got the one in the legislative reform convo. That was a good one. I put
Yeah,
a
I see
motion
here.
in the chat. I do want it to be clear that this committee gave significant direction that was a part of approving these proposals. I don't want to separate that out. And how that's dealt with is up to KCP and the staff. We don't need to give the details, but I do want to say that with the inclusion of the committee guidance, that's all I'm saying. We didn't
That's
just
fair enough.
reading this.
I'm gonna have to dump my video. You say the audio's up and down.
No, it's
and
not
my
bad. You're
screen
not
is-
bad.
But
No,
my
you're good.
screen is jumping now. This machine is
Okay.
definitely overheated. I'm gonna drop my video here.
Yeah, okay. Your audio is fine. All right. There's a motion in chat. I'll read. Do you want to read it, Chair?
Yeah, sure. That the local conservation fund recommend to the board that the recommendations for funding as per the executive summary provided by the Kootenai Conservation Program with the inclusion of the committee guidance be approved.
Simple enough. Sangeeta, comments on that before we second it?
Yeah, through the chair, I was just reading it a couple of times. It sounds good.
Okay, and I see a seconder. Someone's risen from the oh God, I'm sorry, Cheryl, but at least you seconded it, so that, thank you. Any further discussion? Do we need to include the amounts in the motion? No, okay, so,
Right, to
any
be clear-
opposition? Oh, sorry, go
We
ahead, Chair.
don't need to include them, but when the motion appears on the board agenda, that table from the executive summary needs to be a part of the motion.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Okay, good enough. See if you can remember that. I don't have to because I'm not chair of the board meeting, so. So any further discussion? Seeing none, is there any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes and we'll go to the board on our March board meeting. And I see Director Jackman's come back. Thanks, everyone. Is there any further comments? I don't have my agenda up. Have I forgotten anything?
Public time.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Members of the public, I see Rob and the public. Are there any questions? I'll pause for a moment to see if you want to unmute. And I'll pause for another second. All right, thank you very much. Public to everyone, no questions, thank you. All right, thanks, public. With that in mind, can I have a motion to adjourn? It's moved and seconded. We'll await the doodle poll. Any opposition? Seeing none, we are adjourned and we shall await the doodle poll. Thanks, staff. Thanks, Kendall. Thanks, everyone. And good work on that. Thank you. We're going to leave now. Bye-bye.